With the NFL draft just 3 weeks away, and most of the needle-moving free agent moves made, this is a perfect opportunity to take stock with the Baltimore Ravens and see where things stand with the Ravens roster. Recently, John Harbaugh, who just received a 3-year contract extension, spoke at the NFL Annual League meeting, claiming that, "I love the fact we could line up and play right now," speaking about how the Ravens roster looks at this point. Obviously, the team isn't done adding pieces, and while I share some of Harbaugh's confidence in the belief that with guys like Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Kyle Hamilton, and Marlon Humphrey, you have a good chance on any given Sunday, there are still question marks surrounding this 2025 team. Is Awuzie the outright CB3 if healthy? Are Voorhees and Faalele slotted to be your left and right guards on day one right now? Is depth now a concern at defensive line with Pierce gone? And one of the other questions addressed by Harbaugh at the meeting was if Trenton Simpson was going to step up at linebacker next to Roquan Smith in 2025. I'm Jordan with Ravens Flash Report, and let's get to it. Overall, I do think the Ravens are in a good place just 3 weeks out from the 2025 NFL Draft, as they only have a few holes, and even those holes aren't nearly as glaring as they could be. The re-signing of left tackle Ronnie Stanley before the start of free agency was by far the biggest and most important domino to fall for the Ravens this offseason. Not only because you kept a talented and Pro Bowl level left tackle out of the hands of AFC rivals like Kansas City and New England, but you ensured that Lamar Jackson's blind side will be protected by a trusted teammate that already has great chemistry and communication with the MVP quarterback, and for less than he would have gotten on the open market. Most of the other moves that the Ravens made seem to be more in line with replacing talent that signed elsewhere, and while some signings could be seen as improvements over the previous player, that remains to be seen. Let's first look at some of the Ravens that signed elsewhere and the replacements that seem to fill those gaps. Nelson Agholor and DeAndre Hopkins. This feels like probably the biggest upgrade and should be seen as an improvement to the wide receiver 3 position. I liked Nelly with the Ravens, but his fall-off from 2023 to 2024 was noticeable, and his lack of consistency in production was definitely felt late in the season. Hopkins should be expected to come in and immediately be seen as an upgrade in a few areas as the wide receiver 3. The first is that his production has a higher floor and ceiling than Nelly. Over the past 2 seasons, we can see the clear difference in receptions, yards, and touchdowns, as Hopkins had nearly triple the targets and has been relied a lot more in Tennessee and even Kansas City than Agholor has been in Baltimore. In fact, even after being traded to the Chiefs nearly 2 months into the season, Hopkins has more than doubled the production of Agholor's entire 2024 season. The second and potentially more important upgrade will be the leadership he can provide in the locker room. Overall, our wide receivers are still a very young group, with Bateman and Wallace being the most seasoned as they each enter their 4th year. With Hopkins' experience and proven ability in the red zone, I would be remiss to say this isn't a clear upgrade over Agholor, even if it's for a wide receiver 3 position on the roster. Chris Board, Christian Welch, Malik Harrison for Jake Hummel. This isn't a straight-up swap, as both Board and Harrison were tasked with stepping in for the underperforming Trenton Simpson after the first half of the year. And while I stated earlier John Harbaugh expects Simpson to take a big step forward and reassume his role next to Roquan, that remains to be seen. As for the Jake Hummel acquisition, this is a move to replace special teams contributions from a linebacker role rather than a defensive starter, though he may see some use in a rotational role. Brandon Stevens for Chidobe Awuzie. This might be the most straightforward one-for-one swap we've seen from the Ravens so far this offseason. Although many Ravens fans were frustrated with the dip in play from Stevens from his 2023 season to his 2024 season, it seems fair to assume that he overperformed in 2023 more than underperforming in 2024 from what should have been expected of him. The signing of Awuzie is potentially a low-risk, high-reward one if he can regain his 2019 or 2021 form along with staying healthy. The reason I say potentially for low risk is because due to his injury history, we can't assume the Ravens are done looking for a potential CB3. If so, they run the risk of getting into another situation like they had in 2022 when Kyle Fuller's season ended during a Week 1 Jets game, and they had to rely on a rookie, Stevens, and rushing a still-recovered Marcus Peters back from injury. With several losses at the cornerback position such as Tre'Davious White, Arthur Millette, Brandon Stevens, and Trayvon Mullins, it seems like the Ravens will look into the draft to find their future CB3. However, there are still several free agent options they could look at, such as Shaquille Griffin or Stephon Gilmore from the Vikings, or even Mike Hilton from the Bengals. Either way, there needs to be some attention still paid to the secondary. Josh Johnson for Cooper Rush. The backup quarterback is not a position often talked about, but it's one that is extremely important if ever needed. And over the past few seasons, the Ravens have not been in the best position if Lamar Jackson went down for longer than a few drives. Josh Johnson is, as we all know at this point, a well-traveled and experienced quarterback who knows the Ravens system well and can sit back there and play the position. But he's not going to win you games. I'm not going to tell you that if Lamar goes down, Cooper Rush is the next best thing, but he's certainly more capable of winning games for the Ravens than Johnson would be in 2025. Before the draft. As always, when the Ravens enter the draft, they will go in with their customary approach of taking the best player available, or BPA as it's often called. While I'm sure this will still remain to be their approach in 2025, as it has served them well in the past, there are certainly some position groups that will be needing bolstering. The Ravens could make these selections in any order over the 3 days with their 11 picks, but with regards to team needs, I believe there are a couple positions that should be addressed early in this draft rather than later. Day 1, safety, edge, offensive line. These three positions are where the Ravens could find the first-year impact players they're looking for. Yes, we have a safety duo in Hamilton and Washington, but we aren't going to pay both at the end of the season, and we need a replacement or even a potential upgrade for Washington. Yes, we have a number of guys at the edge outside linebacker group, but our leading pass rusher is KVN, who is having a career renaissance in the sack department, but we can't depend on that continuing. And Oweh's entire career has been questions of consistency and finishing plays in the backfield, not to mention the fact that his contract is up after this season. And while we technically have penciled in starters at all 5 offensive line spots, both guard spots are not locked in without question, and losing both Patrick McCarry and Josh Jones while only re-signing Ben Cleveland means we have less depth as well. With possible safeties such as Malachi Starks out of Georgia and Nick Emanwari from South Carolina, we solve the depth issue at the safety position and potentially the starting issue after the 2025 season. Edge rushers like Mike Green from Marshall and James Pierce out of Tennessee would be rotational to start the season, but depending on their development and the production from KVN or Oweh, they could see more snaps and even a full-time swap to starting duties before the end of the season. There is a whole host of offensive line players, including tackles like Josh Simmons from Ohio State or Josh Connerly from Oregon, as well as interior offensive linemen such as Tyler Booker from Alabama and Gray Zabel from North Dakota State being possible options available. We know we have the tackles locked up for 2025 in Stanley and Rosengarten, but what if either goes down? Our depth at tackle is unsustainably thin, and while we've seen more starts from Faalele than Voorhees, neither is a shoo-in for being a long-term answer at the guard position. Day 2, offensive line, cornerback, defensive line. While I have these 3 positions listed, the implied notion is that if a player falls to us at pick 59 or 91 on day 2 from any of the day 1 position groups, they would take them. A few players I've seen somewhat regularly on day 2 that I would be more than okay with the Ravens taking include safety Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, edges Landon Jackson from Arkansas, Jack Sawyer from Ohio State, and Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss. Some interior offensive line players that the Ravens could snag that I've seen available in rounds 2 and 3 include Marcus Mbao from Purdue, Tate Ratledge from Georgia, and Charles Grant out of William & Mary. As far as possible offensive tackles on day 2, we would be looking at eventual replacements and or depth behind Ronnie and Roger, mostly as they are, of course, locks at their positions, along with Tyler Linderbaum at center. Some of the options for tackle on day 2 would be guys like Cameron Williams out of Texas. One of my favorites is Wyatt Milam from West Virginia, Emory Jones from LSU, and Anthony Belton from North Carolina State. Cornerback on day 1 is looking less and less likely as the 27th pick falls between the true first-round talents and the second-rounders, which would be too much of a reach. Day 2 corners, however, are a very solid option for the Ravens, which could include Darian Porter from Iowa State, Dorian Strong from Virginia Tech, Denzel Burke from Ohio State, and Zy Alexander from LSU. They may not be relied on as starters by the end of the season like Nate Wiggins, but we need growing depth at corner as much as we need competition for CB3. And finally, some of the potential defensive linemen we could see on day 2 include Alfred Collins from Texas, TJ Sanders from South Carolina, Omar Norman Lott from Tennessee, Deion Walker from the University of Kentucky, and Joshua Farmer from Florida State. all have solid qualities about them and would be welcomed additions to our current rotation, with some even looking like eventual starters. At the end of the day, the Ravens still have several areas that they need to address before I would say they could just line up and play right now, as John Harbaugh boasts. Our secondary is lacking both starting talent and depth. Our offensive line is good, but has nothing behind it. And while I do think our D-line and edge players are solid, the success of this defense, and therefore the team, stands upon their inconsistent ability to put pressure on opposing quarterbacks. As far as addressing the inside linebacker position and how they go about selecting one in the draft versus their belief and plan with Trenton Simpson, I haven't the foggiest idea how they will approach that. All I will say is that they will probably take a swing on someone on day 3 rather than day 2, unless something happens like it did with Hamilton, and they simply have to, but I don't think any linebackers fit that criteria in this draft, let alone one that falls on day 2. At this point in the offseason, I do feel better about the team's roster and direction than I did at this time last year, and while I do have my doubts about both individual players and even whole position groups, I think the core of this team, as well as the potential answers available in this year's draft, paint a positive picture for the 2025 season. If you've enjoyed this Ravens Flock Stock report, go ahead and give the video a like. If you're new around here, subscribe, and tell me down below in the comments section the biggest concerns you have with the current roster. As always, stay safe out there, and go Ravens.